We talk about fighting violent extremism now because the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism says it is deploying over 200 ambassadors who will now be tasked with promoting peace along border communities of the northern part of the country. The center, in its violent extremism vulnerability report last year, cited the northern parts of Ghana, of the country, as a hotspot for violent extremism. This was corroborated by President Akufo-Addo, who then is now alarmed that the infiltration of these activities of violent extremists from the Sahel parts of the sub-region through the northern borders could jeopardize national security. Well, in a bid to forestall all of these significant security implications within the West Africa sub-region, the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism says it is developing a framework that will help effectively tackle some of these security challenges up north. We're fortunate to be having Mukhtar Momoni Mukhtar, the Executive Director for the West Africa Center for Counter-Extremism, joining us in studio now. Thank you so much, sir. And it's good to have you just after a few moments when you addressed the press today, laying out the challenges that we're facing up north. We published a story a few days ago about the tension simmering in Boku, and that's also complicating, the threats from the porous nature of the borders that we have. But what's the latest assessment you've done on the security challenge up north, and why do we need peace ambassadors at this point?
Well, at the moment, the story doesn't look good enough in the northern parts of the country. Of course, you highlighted the issue of Boku. Boku is just part of the mix of security challenges in terms of unresolved chieftains and ethnic conflicts in northern Ghana. We're seeing pervasive situations of youth unemployment and situations what we describe as pervasive insecurity or criminal subculture within the cyberspace. We're seeing huge numbers of vulnerable people that have been created as a result of the lack of job opportunities and unsustainable, income sources. Yeah. You just saw the report by the UNDP that indicates that last year, in particular, over 850,000 people in this country have been pushed into poverty. And if you look at the report, together with similar report the year before, point to the fact that the northern parts of this country are even much more vulnerable than the national average. And so it tells you that this part of the country is a very, very vulnerable space.
And you say you have a comprehensive framework that can help tackle that. In fact, you're pointing out some of the interventions you're planning for the northern parts of the country, deploying over 200 peace ambassadors. What will be the role of these individuals, and what are they set to do? Yeah,
so indeed, it's not a new framework. It's not an isolated framework. It is a series of activities that are drawn from a national framework for preventing and countering violent extremism by the Ministry of National Security. And so we have drawn a program out of that framework in line with the U.S. strategy for conflict prevention and promoting stability. It's a project, it is a program by the U.S. government to ensure we prevent conflicts and promote stability. Right. And together with this national framework, we have drawn a series of activities in the northern part of the country. We're seeking to engage in building people we call peace ambassadors and local community actors. And we follow up with dialogue sessions that are intended at, bridging goodwill between, and amongst ethnic groups in this part of the country. And I must use this opportunity to highlight the issue of the Fulbe community in Ghana. The Fulani community in Ghana is significantly very, very vulnerable. If you look at the pervasive situations of conflict between this ethnic group and many, many other communities, especially farming communities, it's a huge source of worry because we've seen that play out in the Sahel that translated eventually into situations of violent extremist recruitment. And we're not very far away from that because just 2 years ago, in 2021, in June, a young guy from Karaga area went to join ISIS, to join in particular Jenim in central Mali, and eventually blew himself up, and citing issues of corruption, issues of injustice, and discrimination against the Fulbe community here. Right. Terrorist groups take advantage of that and recruit vulnerable people. They take advantage of such narratives, weaponize those narratives, and recruit vulnerable people. And we want to be able to build resilience against those situations.
While this is commendable, the point about keeping boots on the ground, the belief of some other experts is we should pursue that vigorously because peace can only be given a chance when we sufficiently protect our borders and contain the threats within?
I'm a very huge opponent to the use of combat measure, the use of boots on the ground. Of course, we need to have a good balance between hardcore measures, what we call the kinetic approach to dealing with security, and human security. In fact, most of what we're dealing with today is a product of failure of state and stakeholders and local actors to deal with the human security elements in our society. Right. And in fact, if you dwell so much on the issue of the approach in terms of the combat on the ground, you actually would create counterproductive outcomes, and we have seen that play out very, very poorly within the Sahel. Within the Sahel, we've seen a huge situation of counterproductive outcomes as a result of combat measures, militarized approach to dealing with violent extremism. In many parts of this space, what we're seeing, the terrorism we're seeing, is a failure of state security, the state actors, to provide what we call the entitlements of citizenship, issues of job creation, providing social amenities, building a stronger culture in terms of goodwill between security services and the local population, and dealing with vulnerabilities along the borders. These things are very key. If you fail to do that, especially providing opportunities for young people, you would create vulnerabilities for exploitation.
The president is on record to have admitted that we're facing, it's a spillover crisis that we seem to be facing, looking at what's happening up north in Burkina Faso, and the possibility of having these spillover effects affecting us much more because we're closer to this country. First of all, what's been your assessment after the last report you issued assessing the situation, the vulnerability levels in the area? And what are the effective tools in tackling it aside what you're doing?
Yes, I think that the President, His Excellency, is spot on when he talks about the spillover effect. We're seeing the spillover effect happen between the borders of Mali and Burkina Faso, and that's why we're seeing the pervasive situation in the country. We're seeing the spillover effect happen in the northern borders of Benin, northern borders of Togo, northern borders of Cote d'Ivoire. Right. And so our biggest worry, or part of our biggest worry, should be the fact that we could have that phenomenon on our northern borders, and Boko is in focus in this particular instance. And so we have to do very well to ensure that we build resilience against that. But in terms of the vulnerability internally, the issue of inter-ethnic clashes and tensions, the vulnerabilities around that is huge. Since the last report we issued, we've seen a lot of intervention. There are a lot of interventions in the northern part of the country, and that includes state actors and non-state actors, and more especially programs that are sponsored by international organizations, including the USAID and other partners in that space. What we are not seeing, it's more of what we are actually doing now. We need to scale up. What we're doing is significantly very, very woeful in terms of its capacity to build the resilience that we're looking at. The inter-ethnic clashes, the vulnerabilities around that is huge. In the Savannah region, for instance, there are a lot of inter-ethnic issues that we need to resolve, and the Fulani factor is a big factor. Look at the northern region, it's the same thing. The Upper East region, the Upper West region. I was in many of these instances. Example, in the place like Bongo Soy, it's close to Bongo, the Bongo area. The issue of the Fulani integration is a big, big national issue that we have to raise to national level to ensure that there's enough focus on that. Other than that, we could be ambushed by time, and it might be too late to act on that.
Let's exploit that a bit, because you are describing this as a national crisis. Why do you feel that Fulanis, or as many will call them, these nomads or nomadic herdsmen, should be of national importance to us, particularly when the criticism is that they usually move from other West African countries? They are not originally Ghanaians, as the speculation is.
There's a lot of I will use that, I should get a better word, away from propaganda, about what the Fulani ethnic group consists of, or what it means to us, or what it should mean to us. Of course, they constitute the largest nomadic, group, pastoralists in our region, and so a significant number of them do not have a stationary, place of abode, and so they move from place to place, especially those who are cattle headers. But there's a significant number of Fulani community members who are not nomads, who are not, pastoralists, and they engage in regular, occupations like doctors, like nurses, like teachers, tradesmen, consultants, and all that. And yet we box all of them into one single category of people. What the problem is, we have built a systematic culture over a period, historically, negative stereotypes against that, demography. And for a long time, even people who should know better seem to latch onto this, and it continue to deepen that culture of discrimination and marginalization against them. I come from the northern part of the country, and even in our youthful ages, we saw it. It is very, very systematic, very toxic culture of marginalization against them. When people talk about the Fulani ethnic group, they often, couch it in the context of the cattle header, situation or farmer conflict situation. But it goes beyond that. There's a systematic culture of marginalization against the group, and they are significantly discriminated against. When it comes to access to services, healthcare, public transportation, education, and regular, exactly, regular everyday living scenarios.
And you be subjected to the issue about evidence in supporting the claims you're making?
Very much so. Anyone who is familiar with the context I'm talking about, you don't need to push hard for any evidence. In terms of their access to public transportation, they are treated significantly very different. When it comes to healthcare, they are treated very different. And not just the northern part, many parts of this country, even here in Accra, people are discriminated based on their ethnicity, and the Fulani ethnic group is part of those. I'm in contact with a lot of them. There's a Fulani Council of Chiefs, and there's the Tabita Pulaku group, is the biggest, group association, for the group. And they tell you stories that would shock you in terms of the things they go through on a regular basis. And I've been witnesses to some of them. There's a situation of a gentleman here in Accra who narrated an incident when he was going through registration and the national identification or registration. When he got to his turn, the officer asked him, he looked at him because he looked different, said, are you a Fulani? He said, yes. So, okay, please stand here. So he stood there. The next person to him is a co-worker from the office, who is also of the Mosi ethnic group from Burkina Faso. Right. So he registered. She attended to him, and whilst attending to him, my friend came back to the lady. So why didn't you ask this man whether he is a Muslim before you attended to him? And the lady took offense. He said, I'm from originally. We were from the Sahel, but I was born here. My parents were born here. This man, I know him, he knows me. They come from Burkina Faso as well. So why do you discriminate on the basis of how I look? Those things are very pervasive in this space. Healthcare is the same thing. Public transportation is the same thing. To the extent that we're encouraging Fulani parents to send their kids to school, the kids, a lot of them in those parts, are not interested in schooling. Not because they don't want to, because of the things they are subjected to within school environment. The kind of jokes they poke at them and the kind of things they say to them, it is very, very discouraging. And this is something we should not joke with, because these similar situations have happened in the Sahel in many parts. That translated into situations of marginalization that makes them suggestible to recruitment. And we have to be very, very mindful of that. And I think that it's about time we elevated it to national level conversations, and not just conversations, but actions that are intended at repairing this damage that we're seeing happen to us. Other than that, it might be too late.
Okay, we need to go. What are the expectations from your perspective as a civil society organization in terms of what the authorities should be doing to tackle this national emergency that you talk about?
I think that we need to have a very harmonized approach to dealing with violent extremism and the drivers of extremism. At the moment, of course, 2 years ago, the conversation was different. There was very limited understanding and interventions. But today, there's significant attention and interest in dealing with violent extremism in our space here. National level actions, non-state actor, community actor, we need to have a very harmonized approach to it. Everybody gets onto the same page to ensure that we drive this in a manner that can lead to the outcomes that we're looking at. But more importantly, we need to ensure that the media and what we've been talking about, the whole of society approach, should give a meaning to ensure that everybody participates in it. Government rules out, if you see something, say something. That is not enough. What should you see to say something? We need to broaden the education and awareness creation to all parts of the country. Every single individual in this space matters in terms of understanding what it is that we're dealing with to ensure that we effectively build resilience against terrorism.
And we'll be having this conversation again, trust me, Mukhtar. It's a very serious national matter that you're pointing out, but grateful for spending some time with us here on the Pulse. Well,